because of the power, you have the electricity. You can see now, it's dark.
Are you going to survive in your business?
I don't think so. I don't think so.
Many African nations face an electricity crisis, especially Burkina Faso, which is fighting one of the toughest battles. For years, less than a quarter of its population has had reliable access to power. Blackouts are normal. Entire regions go dark for hours, and every plan for industry, agriculture, or technology hits the same wall. There simply isn't enough electricity to build the future the country wants. That's why the government made a bold decision: partner with Russia's Rosatom to build West Africa's first nuclear power plant. A project this big doesn't just change a grid, it changes a nation. But recently, something unusual has been happening. Mysterious convoys of heavy equipment started entering the country. People began claiming that Burkina Faso had received a second consignment of power plants, shipments supposedly linked to the nuclear project. No official confirmation, no explanations, just one growing question. What exactly is Burkina Faso quietly preparing for? Let's find out. Before the rumors, before the excitement, before anyone whispered about a second consignment, something much simpler happened. People noticed trucks. Not ordinary trucks carrying cement or grain, but long convoys loaded with heavy machinery, metal frames, large crates, and industrial equipment that didn't look like anything familiar. They weren't moving quietly either. They were escorted, guarded, and handled with the kind of careful attention usually reserved for military hardware or election materials. And the strangest part? They arrived without any public announcement at all. In a country where every new generator, transformer, or solar panel is usually displayed proudly by officials to show progress, this sudden silence felt almost intentional. No minister appeared on television to explain the deliveries. No press release claimed responsibility. No project name was attached to the incoming equipment. They simply arrived, were moved to storage, and disappeared from public view. People began recording videos. First out of curiosity, then out of suspicion. They shared clips of trucks rolling into Ouagadougou at dawn, or containers being offloaded late at night. Social media timelines filled with guesses. Some said it was new thermal equipment for the capital. Others were convinced it was solar hardware. A few, especially those who had followed government announcements closely since 2023, believed something far bigger was unfolding. They linked the convoys to the nuclear project, the ambitious plan Burkina Faso signed with Russia's Rosatom to build West Africa's first nuclear power plant. Since the agreements were officially finalized in 2025, people already expected major groundwork to begin.
Though there is one country that is using it as an opportunity to make deeper inroads in Africa, and it is Russia. From security cooperation to economic ties and to diplomacy, Moscow is becoming the go-to friend for Africa.
So when unfamiliar machinery started entering the country, the human mind simply connected the dots. And that's how the claim took off. That this was the second consignment of power plants, supposedly ordered specifically to prepare the ground for the nuclear facility. The rumor spread because it felt logical. Burkina Faso suffers from one of the lowest electricity access rates in the region, with less than 25% of the population connected to reliable power. A nuclear project of this scale cannot even begin without strong pre-construction energy support. So people assumed the government was quietly boosting the grid to prepare for the upcoming reactor. But the silence didn't just create curiosity, it created excitement. For many Burkinabe citizens, watching these convoys felt like watching their country step into a future that once seemed impossible. A future where electricity isn't a privilege, where darkness doesn't dictate opportunity, where factories, hospitals, and homes can depend on power that never runs out. In that sense, the rumor of a second consignment wasn't just a rumor. It was a symbol of hope. And yet, despite all the speculation, there was still one thing missing: official confirmation. Government sources didn't deny the arrivals, but they didn't link them to the nuclear project either. That vacuum of information created the perfect environment for theories to grow. Which leads us to the real curiosity at the heart of the story. If these mysterious shipments truly exist, what exactly are they preparing Burkina Faso for? They are preparing Burkina Faso for something the country has never attempted before: the start of its nuclear era. The mysterious arrivals make sense only when placed against the backdrop of one of the most ambitious energy decisions in West African history. In 2023, Burkina Faso began early cooperation talks with Russia's Rosatom. At first, it sounded like exploration, something distant, something theoretical. But by June 2025, that changed forever. The government and Rosatom signed binding intergovernmental agreements to build a nuclear power plant on Burkina Faso soil. This wasn't a dream anymore. It was a national project with real signatures, real timelines, and real responsibilities.
Burkina Faso, the West African nation, has formalized a major nuclear agreement with Russia. Now, Russia's state nuclear giant, Rosatom, will now collaborate with Ibrahim Traoré-led Burkina Faso.
To understand the weight of this decision, you have to understand the reality Burkina Faso lives with daily. Electricity in the country is scarce, not metaphorically, but statistically. Less than 1 in 4 Burkina Faso citizens has reliable access to power. Blackouts are routine. Urban areas struggle. Rural areas often live entirely off-grid. For a rapidly growing, industrializing nation, this is more than an inconvenience. It is a developmental ceiling. Nuclear energy became the one solution capable of smashing that ceiling permanently. This is why the government speaks about nuclear power with unusual clarity. For once, national ambitions do not feel abstract. Minister Yakuba Zabre-Guba has openly stated that Burkina Faso cannot industrialize without large, stable, sovereign energy, and that nuclear power is the only technology capable of doubling national electricity production by 2030. Countries with limited hydropower potential and inconsistent thermal capacity simply do not have many alternatives. So when people saw those heavy convoys and claimed they were a second consignment of power plants, the theory fit neatly into what the government is already building toward. Nuclear power requires staging. It requires preparation. It requires infrastructure that can support high-intensity construction long before a reactor is installed. But here's the part many people overlook. You cannot build a nuclear plant on a weak grid. Even the preliminary stages, site preparation, cooling system installation, command room construction, electrical substation work, and safety perimeter setup require stable electricity. A nation must strengthen its grid before it can host a reactor. And Burkina Faso knows this. That's why the groundwork phase feels so large and so urgent. Reinforcing generation capacity is not optional. It is the foundation. Whether the trucks filmed online were part of the nuclear support system or part of general grid expansion, the direction is the same. Burkina Faso is preparing for a nuclear-powered future. But this leads to another crucial point that many outside observers fail to understand. Why does Burkina Faso need all this extra electricity before the nuclear construction even begins? That is the next piece of the puzzle. Burkina Faso needs all this extra electricity before nuclear construction begins for one simple reason. The current grid would collapse under the pressure of a nuclear build. Most people imagine nuclear power as something that only matters once the reactor starts running, but the truth is the opposite. The most electricity-demanding phase isn't operation, it's construction. Every piece of the pre-nuclear process requires stable, uninterrupted power. Start with the basics. Nuclear construction is a 24/7 environment. You have cranes that cannot stop mid-lift, cooling and testing systems that must stay online, monitoring equipment, lighting for night operations, welding systems, high-capacity machinery, continuous security perimeters, and a long chain of technical processes that leave absolutely no room for blackouts. Burkina Faso's current grid, fragile, undersupplied, and frequently interrupted, simply cannot support that level of demand. This is why new power sources are arriving so rapidly. Even if the mysterious convoys are not officially linked to the nuclear project, the truth is that they reflect the same urgent need. Stabilize the grid before the nuclear era begins. Without that foundation, the country risks two outcomes, both disastrous. Either the nuclear construction would constantly stall due to insufficient electricity, or the pressure of the construction site would steal power from homes and cities, plunging people into deeper darkness. Neither option is acceptable for a country trying to move forward. This is also where Turkey's Aksa Energy comes into the picture with its 119-megawatt fuel oil plant under construction in Ouagadougou. That single project represents nearly 1/3 of the country's entire existing productive capacity. Think about that. one plant adding as much power as the entire grid struggles to produce today. Burkina Faso is not playing small. These are not minor upgrades. These are structural reinforcements, the steel bars inside the concrete of the nation's future. And it's not just thermal. Solar expansions are happening quietly, grid upgrades are accelerating, new transformers are being installed, and old transmission lines are being replaced. The country is trying to build a grid strong enough to host Africa's most ambitious energy leap. But there is another layer to this story that people often miss. Stability equals safety. Nuclear technology does not tolerate unstable energy environments. Engineering teams need power to verify safety protocols, manage emergency systems, run diagnostics, and monitor radiation protection during construction. A blackout during any of these stages is not just inconvenient, it is dangerous. So all the extra electricity arriving today isn't a luxury or a political showpiece. It is the prerequisite for a nuclear-powered Burkina Faso. The trucks people filmed, the new generators being installed, the solar fields expanding, these are bricks in the same wall. But this leads to the next logical question. If these upgrades are so crucial to the nuclear project, why is the government not openly connecting them to the nuclear plan? Let's pause for a second to say, big thank you to the Black Culture Diary community, where Black voices, stories, and legacies are preserved and amplified. By becoming a member, you're not just supporting the channel, you're becoming part of a powerful cultural movement. Let's continue. The government is not openly connecting these upgrades to the nuclear plan because Ibrahim Traoré is building this project quietly, not loudly. Nuclear development is not like building a bridge or a road. The moment a leader announces every step publicly, pressure begins. Geopolitical pressure, financial pressure, diplomatic pressure, and even sabotage attempts masked as concerns. Traoré learned quickly that when a small nation reaches for a big technology, it must move in silence until the foundation is untouchable. This is why every major step so far has happened with minimal spectacle. When Burkina Faso first signed cooperation documents with Rosatom in 2023, the announcement was modest. When the binding intergovernmental agreements were finalized in June 2025, the ceremony was functional, not flamboyant. And the energy reinforcements now being deployed, thermal plants, solar expansions, backup systems, are being framed as general grid upgrades, not nuclear preparation. For Traoré, this strategy is deliberate. Announcing that a particular shipment is for nuclear support would trigger immediate scrutiny. Western governments, energy lobbies, and international financing institutions historically discourage nuclear expansion in developing countries unless they can control it. Public declarations attract lectures, warnings, and intervention disguised as assistance. Silence, however, creates room to work. And silence has another advantage: momentum without distraction. If every shipment were branded nuclear-related, debates would erupt, critics would mobilize, and analysts would argue over whether the country is moving too fast or too slow. Instead, the government is focusing on building the infrastructure step by step, letting the results speak when they are ready. This method is not new. Countries like the UAE, Egypt, and even South Korea used similar strategies during early nuclear development: quiet groundwork, controlled disclosure, and public communication only when major milestones were completed. Traoré appears to be applying the same logic: build the capacity first, then unveil the monumental project when nothing can slow it down. Another layer is political stability. Burkina Faso is in the middle of a national transformation, military restructuring, infrastructure rebuilding, economic diversification, and social stabilization. A high-profile nuclear project carries both inspiration and tension. By limiting public discussion, the government keeps expectations realistic while avoiding unnecessary internal debates that could divide opinion before construction even starts. But beyond all these tactical reasons, there is the simplest motivation. Traoré wants results, not applause. The government has stated repeatedly that its ultimate goal is energy sovereignty, electricity that Burkina Faso controls, produces, and distributes without relying on imports. Nuclear power is the strongest pillar of that future. Every generator installed today, every megawatt added, every grid reinforcement completed is part of that sovereign architecture. This brings us to the next critical puzzle piece. If Traoré is moving quietly and methodically, how close is Burkina Faso to actually beginning physical nuclear construction? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. Burkina Faso is much closer to beginning physical nuclear construction than most observers realize. The silence has made people assume that the project is still at a distant, conceptual stage. But behind closed doors, the groundwork is already unfolding in the structured, procedural way nuclear development always begins. Quietly, technically, step by step. Rosatom doesn't sign binding intergovernmental agreements unless both sides are ready to move from discussion to implementation. Once Burkina Faso finalized those agreements in June 2025, the country officially entered the pre-construction phase, an intensive period that includes feasibility reviews, site evaluations, safety planning, and capacity building. These steps rarely make headlines because they are not glamorous. They involve engineers walking kilometers of land to select ideal geological conditions. They involve drafting nuclear legislation that aligns with international safety standards. They involve training programs, where Burkinabe engineers and technicians start learning reactor physics, radiation protection, and nuclear infrastructure management. These are the seeds of the plant, long before a single piece of concrete is poured. Another major indicator of progress is grid preparation. Nuclear reactors cannot operate on weak or unstable grids, and so the infrastructure in Burkina Faso is being upgraded right now. New power plants, solar expansions, and backup capacities are directly tied to the timeline of the nuclear build. The arrival of the 119-megawatt Axa energy plant, scheduled to be fully functional by late 2026, is not just a coincidence. It aligns neatly with the window in which nuclear site preparation is expected to ramp up. This is how nuclear timelines typically look: stabilize the grid, strengthen foundational infrastructure, then roll out physical construction in phases. Burkina Faso is following that pattern with striking precision. Additionally, Rosatom's involvement usually follows a predictable sequence across partner nations. Preliminary agreements, already done in 2023. Technical and legal frameworks completed in 2025. Site selection and feasibility studies, currently underway. Human resource development, active. Site preparation and civil works, expected next stage. If these steps continue at the current pace, site preparation could begin between 2026 and 2027. That timeline is not only realistic, but it's consistent with global nuclear development norms. And once site preparation begins, the project is no longer theoretical. It becomes irreversible. Equipment starts arriving. Foundations are poured. Specialized crews mobilize. It becomes impossible to hide or downplay what is happening. This explains why the strange convoys sparked so much speculation. Even if those shipments were not confirmed as nuclear-related, the country is undeniably moving into the phase where visible changes begin. And when nuclear construction becomes physically visible in Burkina Faso, the entire regional energy landscape will shift. But this raises the final and most consequential question. What will Burkina Faso look like once the nuclear plant moves from preparation to construction and the country's energy future changes permanently? Burkina Faso will become a completely different country once the nuclear plant moves from preparation to construction. The moment heavy machinery begins shaping the site, the country's identity shifts from an energy-struggling nation to a nation actively building its own long-term power backbone. Nuclear construction isn't just an engineering project, it's a statement. It tells investors, industries, and regional partners that Burkina Faso is done waiting for slow, unreliable energy solutions. It is stepping into a category of nations that build their future instead of inheriting it. The immediate impact will be economic. With a nuclear project underway, Burkina Faso will attract new industries that previously avoided the country due to power instability. Factories that rely on consistent electricity, data centers that need an uninterrupted supply, and agro-processing plants that have long desired stable power. All of these become realistic. Jobs will be created not only in engineering, but in construction, logistics, training, environmental management, and technology. A nuclear project becomes an employment engine by sheer scale. Social life changes too. Blackouts, which today feel normal, will slowly shift from daily expectation to rare inconvenience. Schools will be able to run equipment without interruption. Hospitals will operate advanced medical devices without relying on backup generators. Businesses will expand their hours. Rural electrification will move from a distant dream to an achievable target. Electricity is not just light, it is a transformation. Geopolitically, Burkina Faso becomes harder to pressure. Energy dependence is one of the main levers foreign powers use to influence small nations. But once a country generates its own vast, stable electricity supply, that leverage disappears. This is part of Traoré's larger vision: sovereignty backed by infrastructure. A nation with its own nuclear backbone cannot be easily destabilized, isolated, or manipulated. It becomes energy secure and therefore politically secure. The psychological effect on citizens will be even deeper. Burkina Faso has spent decades fighting the narrative that it must remain small, powerless, and dependent. A nuclear project rewrites that narrative instantly. It tells the world and the Burkinabe people that the country is capable of mastering the same technologies that power global superpowers. It places Burkina Faso in conversations usually reserved for industrialized states, and it gives the population a sense that development is not something borrowed, but something built. When construction progresses, West Africa itself will shift. Neighboring countries will watch closely, some with curiosity, others with envy. A successful nuclear project in Burkina Faso creates a precedent that energy transformation is not limited to wealthy nations. It shows that determination and the right partnerships can break long-standing development ceilings. So yes, the moment nuclear construction begins, Burkina Faso changes forever. It becomes stronger, more independent, more attractive to investors, and more confident in its future. It steps into a new era defined not by scarcity, but by capability. And that leads to the final reflection. If this is the transformation during construction, how powerful will Burkina Faso become once the nuclear plant actually switches on? Let us know in the comment section. Are you ready for the change? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.